January 3rd, 2026, 2:47 a.m. U.S. Special Forces breach a compound in Caracas. 6 hours later, Venezuela's president is in American custody, and the world just got a lot more dangerous. This wasn't leaked years later. This wasn't a covert op. Trump announced it on Truth Social like he was ordering breakfast. Nicolás Maduro has been captured by U.S. forces. And if you think this was just about catching one bad guy, you're not paying attention. Here's who Maduro is. He took power in 2013 after Hugo Chavez died. Within years, Venezuela collapsed. Like actually collapsed. The economy shrank 80%. The worst peacetime economic destruction in modern history. To put that in perspective, that's worse than the Great Depression. Way worse. Millions fled. Hyperinflation made money worthless. And the U.S. government claimed Maduro was flooding America with cocaine. In 2020, the U.S. had offered $15 million, which was later raised to $25 million and finally increased to $50 million in August 2025. The largest reward ever placed on a foreign head of state. They wanted him badly. But here's what's insane. Nobody saw this coming. Well, actually, the signs were everywhere. People just weren't looking. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, U.S. naval vessels had been appearing near Venezuela's coast for months. Intelligence flights increased. The military was repositioning assets across the Caribbean. And get this, since September 2025, the U.S. had been striking what they called drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean and Pacific. They claimed it was about drugs. Legal experts called it dubious. The whole time, officials kept saying, "We're not seeking regime change." But they also authorized covert CIA action and said the situation was intolerable. Translation? Something was coming. So the night of January 3rd happens. Special forces hit the compound at 2:47 a.m. Air support takes out communications. Defense systems go dark. And here's where it gets brutal. About 75 guards were killed. Cuban and Venezuelan forces defending Maduro. Within hours, he and his wife Celia Flores are extracted. They're put on a plane, flown to New York. The whole operation, under 6 hours. Secretary of State Marco Rubio would later say, "This wasn't an invasion, we didn't occupy a country," which is a weird thing to clarify unless people are asking. At 5:21 a.m. Eastern Time, Trump announced on Truth Social that Maduro had been captured. Hours later, at 11 a.m., he held a press conference at Mar-a-Lago with full details. And this is where things get weird. He doesn't just say they caught Maduro. He says the United States will run Venezuela. He talks about oil a lot. We'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries. This won't cost us anything. He's basically planning to rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure and profit from it. Remember, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. But here's the problem. Experts say that's completely unrealistic. Venezuela's oil industry is destroyed. It would take years and billions of dollars to fix, and oil prices are falling. But Trump's selling this like it's a done deal. Meanwhile, Venezuela is in chaos. With Maduro gone, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez's whereabouts were disputed, with some reports placing her in Russia, while Venezuelan officials claimed she remained in the country. But the military's fractured. Some generals support her, others don't. Nobody knows who's actually in charge. Streets fill with protesters. Some celebrate. Others call it an illegal invasion. And here's what's really telling. Trump did not work with Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader disqualified from the 2024 ballot. Instead, he maintained relations with interim President Delcy Rodriguez, keeping the regime structure intact, but without Maduro. The opposition candidate Edmundo González Urrutia, believed to have won the July 2024 election by overwhelming margins according to opposition tallies, was not engaged by the Trump administration. Latin America's response? Total split. Mexico and Colombia condemned it. Argentina and Ecuador supported it. At the UN, diplomats are debating whether this was an arrest or a kidnapping. Russia and China called it imperialism. The EU issued a very diplomatic, "we're deeply concerned" statement because legally this is a nightmare. International law experts unanimously called this a violation of UN Charter Article 2.4, which prohibits military force against another state's territorial integrity. Republican officials argued Trump had inherent constitutional authority under Article 2 to enforce drug indictments. But that interpretation, contested by international law scholars, and has no precedent in modern practice. You can't just fly into another country, grab their president, and call it a drug bust. That's not how extradition works. The US and Venezuela don't have an extradition treaty. So this wasn't an extradition, it was a military seizure of a sitting head of state. And here's why that matters. If the US can do this to Venezuela, what stops them from doing it to anyone else? Kim Jong-un has been accused of drug smuggling. So have officials in Iran, Syria, Nicaragua. Are they next? And flip it. What stops China from seizing a leader they consider a threat? What stops Russia? The norm has always been that sitting heads of state are untouchable, even dictators, even criminals, because the alternative is complete chaos. That norm just died, and Colombia knows it. They immediately sent armed forces to their border with Venezuela, expecting refugees to flood in. The region's on edge. But let's talk about the plan, or lack of one. Secretary Rubio outlined a three-phase approach. Phase 1, pressure remaining Venezuelan officials to cut ties with Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran. Phase 2, reform Venezuela's oil industry. Phase 3, release political prisoners. Cool. How? With what? Trump says we'll run Venezuela, but there's no large ground force assembled. For context, Venezuela is twice the size of California with 30 million people. When the US invaded Iraq in 2003, a country of similar size, they used hundreds of thousands of troops, and that still turned into a brutal civil war that lasted years. According to Brookings experts, this operation was tactically impressive, but strategically divorced from any coherent plan for success. They're worried this becomes Iraq 2.0. And the wildest part? Multiple experts say this might violate the Trump administration's own national security strategy, which explicitly rejected nation building and said the US was done with foreign entanglements. That was literally the campaign promise. But now Trump's talking about running another country indefinitely. His MAGA base wanted America first. Instead, they got America everywhere. So where does this leave us? Maduro's in custody. He'll face trial in New York. Venezuela's government is intact but unstable. The military's fractured. The economy's worse. And Trump just set a precedent that any country with enough power can ignore international law whenever they want. Some people see this as justice, a dictator finally facing consequences. Others see it as the end of the rules-based international order. And honestly, both might be true. The operation worked. Special forces executed it flawlessly. But what happens next? That's the question nobody can answer. Because right now, Trump's threatening Colombia, talking about taking Greenland by force, and eyeing Cuba. He's rebranded the Monroe Doctrine as the Don Roe Doctrine, his plan to dominate the Western Hemisphere. And every authoritarian leader watching just learned a lesson. Sovereignty is optional if someone stronger decides it is. On January 3rd, 2026, the United States didn't just arrest one man, they changed the rules. And we're all about to find out what that actually means.